All right. Well, it's 2:30 on my computer, and the screen seems to be working. Hello, everybody. My name is Chris Patterson. I'm a program manager on the Visual Studio Online team. Used to be just TFS. We've expanded. We have a whole host of things. Specifically, I work on the build automation tools. So team build. Is anybody familiar with that? Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm trying to make it better. What about Visual Studio Online? How many people here have an account? Almost everybody. Good. Are you actually using it? Sweet. How many people here are using Azure? Lots of you. Great. That's even better. So my email address is right there, chris.patterson@microsoft.com, and my Twitter feed, Twitter handle @ChrisRPatterson. I don't really check it very much, but occasionally you can catch me there. Sometimes I even answer questions. So today I want to talk a little bit about I guess what you can do as far as creating your apps, building them, and then building them with VSO, and then deploying to Azure. So most of you have Visual Studio Online accounts, so we won't really spend a whole lot of time going through that. We will go through the basics of getting started. How do I connect my Azure website or cloud service to my VSO project? And I'll talk a little bit more in detail about what actually is going on there. Some of you may have sort of done the very quick publish from source control thing, but there's a number of things going on under the covers. We'll deploy an ASP.NET app with a database using Entity Framework, and I'll show you how to make sure all the migrations work. After that, I'm going to go through a list of sort of other application stacks that Azure supports, most notably today Node.js and PHP, and do very simple apps and show you how you can actually make those deploy with VSO to Azure, because I know I've had a lot of questions on that. And then we'll go into some more advanced deployment scenarios and unit testing. Hopefully it will fill out the whole time here. So very quick with VSO. You guys know this probably if you use it. It's a great place. It's free for up to 5 users. If you're an MSDN subscriber, you can use as many different projects as you like, and for no additional charge, so it's a great value. Okay, enough slides. So basically, the entire rest of the talk is demo. So let's go from there. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm in the Azure, the current old Azure portal, not the new fancy portal that they showed off at the keynote this morning, because I haven't used it, so I didn't want to try to be that brave. But to get everything started, I'm going to create a website. In this case, I'm going to start out with a custom create to let me set up a few different options. And we'll call this ASP.NET-DB Web. All right, that works. It's not used. And for this one, I'm actually going to create a free 20 megabyte SQL database and go ahead and give it a connection string here and set up publish from source control. So I can do this all in one fail swoop. We'll set that up. I'll use my existing SQL server, super secret password. And then, of course, we can set up a number of different deployment options, and we're going to pick VSO for now. Put in my Visual Studio Online account and authorize it. Now, what's going on here is Azure is simply, or we're requesting your permission to give Azure access to your account, just using a pretty standard OAuth flow. And in this horrifically formatted list, which I have filed a bug to fix, should at least be alphabetical. This is a list of all of the team projects that are available in your account. Now, it's a little confusing because if you're using Git with VSO, you can actually have multiple Git repositories in a single team project. And then even with that, of course, you can have multiple branches in the Git repositories. We're working on making this experience better over time, but for now, I'll show you the extra step you have to go through to make sure everything works with the Git repository. So I'm going to pick my Build 2014 project. And then this little handshake that's going on between VSO and Azure is actually giving us a management cert. So you know all the Azure REST endpoints and APIs work with these X509 management certs. And so now you've given one into your VSO account so we can actually communicate back with Azure. And this will become important later on when we start talking about some of the more interesting deployment scenarios or more complex things you can do. So I've got my ASP.NET DB app, and to get everything going, I'm going to download the publish profile. Now, the publish profile, if you guys use the publish profile stuff, it's what lets you publish from Visual Studio to Azure. Now, in this case, or really to a number of different websites, in this particular case, we're not going to use it for publishing directly, but it does give us some other useful settings. So I've got a little website here. Make that 7. Done this demo a few times, so make sure that's there. And it is a basic ASP.NET website that uses Entity Framework with code first, model, and migration. So I'm going to make sure I've got my local database all set. That seems to work. And we'll F5 that and see if everything's going. And this is the, if you're familiar with ASP.NET, the website, there's the Entity Framework Contoso University tutorial. This is a portion of that. So everything's working there. So you guys can easily go get this same app and try all these steps out. Now, in order for this to all work when we do a deployment, we need to make sure that our site is properly configured to actually run those migrations on app startup, and to make sure we have the right connection string and everything set up in our web config. So to do that, we're going to go through the publish wizard, even though we're not actually going to publish. And I'm going to import and create what are called publish profiles. In this case, I'm going to go through and get rid of one and rename this one just to make things easy. All right, so we have a publish profile. And then we want to set one more setting here. In our settings, we want to make sure to check the box to say execute the code first migrations on application start, and then we're going to use this connection string when we do the deployment. So let's go ahead and close that. We want to save it because we want this publish profile. And then let's go ahead and push our changes. Added publish profile. We'll commit that change. And make sure, since we're using Git, we've got to push all our changes up to the server. And now we're ready to go ahead and configure our first deployment. Now you can see here, when we ran through the wizard from the Azure portal, it actually went ahead and created a build definition in our project for us. Now, we try our best to be smart and go find a solution or something in your particular repository. Now, in this case, I actually have multiple repositories in my projects, and the one that is named the same as the project, I don't actually have any code in, so it couldn't find anything to set up. But what I can do is I can hit this drop down, and this is actually giving me a list of all of the various Git repositories that are here. So in this case, I want to use my ASP.NET DB app repository. And then I need to set up the default branch for my manual and scheduled builds. But then since I want to do CI, I actually need to make sure I set up a branch to monitor. And this is kind of nice because I could optionally say, hey, when any branch changes in this repository for this one definition, go ahead and run it. So it gives you the ability to actually have a single definition that deals with multiple branches. I wouldn't recommend that so much if you're deploying, but for other kind of normal CI type builds, it's actually pretty useful. Build defaults. We default to the hosted build controller, which is sort of a virtual controller. If anybody has used Team Build sort of with the normal TFS, you've probably set up a build controller, you've connected it to your collection, and that controller is actually a physical machine. Right? It's a single physical machine, maybe with a bunch of agents attached to it. In this case, the hosted build controller is actually a virtual pointer to a pool of machines that we run for you. And every time we run your build, we get a fresh machine, and then run your build on it, and then throw that machine away and re-image it. We do this for your security, right? For your privacy, to make sure that nobody can, it's a build, right? What do builds do? Builds execute code. So we don't want to have anybody have the ability to, steal your code or do something malicious with it. The other option you have, which can be very useful for what I'll call high volume build users, is you can actually take that standard build controller software that's free, that you can download off of MSDN, and connect it to your Visual Studio Online account and have your own machine. This is really very, very useful for large builds. The hosted build controller has a maximum of a 1 hour limit. So if you have a large app that takes a while to compile and then a while to deploy, you can potentially run into a case where it just stops your build. Has anybody experienced that? Yeah, I'm sorry. We're working on trying to make ways to extend that length, but that's kind of the way that's sort of our throttling for now. But on the plus side is you can set up your own controller, and this controller is actually running on a VM in Azure, so it's got a very fast connection, this CrispPat build controller. It's got a very fast connection to the server, and I'm not actually paying for it because I'm using my MSDN credits to run it, so it's pretty good. And then finally we'll get to the process section. Come on. The internet connection here is not so fast, though. So the process section here is controlled by the build process template. In this case, I'm going to go through and just pick my solution, hit OK. And a couple more things I need to set. Now, in order to make sure that publish profile gets applied, I need to add 2 MS-build arguments. So it's a web publish method, sorry. Method equals package. And so this is telling the targets to use to target a package instead of targeting a website when I publish. And I'll say publish profile equals web deploy. So this is saying that web deploy profile that we created, I want to use that. And that's going to control all of the settings of like web config transforms and all of the other things that particular profile can control. And so everything is set up here, and let's go ahead and queue our build. We'll do it manually first, and then we'll let the CI take over. So this build will run for approximately 3 minutes while it does the deployment. We'll come back and take a look at it. But while we're waiting, let's go ahead and make a quick change to this app so we can see everything update. So I'm going to go to the model and just really quickly add, public, let's call it favorite color. So this is a pretty standard, editing of the model. I'll go through in here and say I want to add a migration for a new feature. Looks like that worked. Let's update my local database. Spelled that right? Yep. Okay. Okay, so we have our new migration. Just so we can actually see it, let's make sure we add it to at least a couple of our views. So I want to, where is it? There's the create method. Let's make sure we can set it. So favorite color. And then on our views, let's just add it to the index real quick. PH. And let's put it down here. Color. And on the create. So most of this is just scaffolding code that was automatically generated. We can copy and paste and fill in the changes. Okay. And then a validation message. Okay. All right, so I think we have all our changes. Let's build. It seems to work. Let's check out locally to see if we're seeing what we expect. And here, students. That's showing the index. If we create a new one, we see it there. We'll call this guy foo bar sometime in May, and he's a big fan of the original Zune. So we'll call it brown. And search. All right, it's working. Great. Okie doke. Let's go and see if our other build. So our build finished. We can see it's deployed to the website. Hopefully, if everything worked properly, we should see the same website with the same data running in Azure. And if it didn't, we'll get to debug. All right, so fantastic. Now, since that worked, all I got to do is go make my changes. So new feature, par commit, push that up to the repository. And see if that worked. Oops. Let's go here. Oh, let's go find the build. All right. OK, so that's building. OK, so while we wait for that to finish and take a look, so it's fairly fast, but it's pretty straightforward. The idea is we have this workflow that is really kind of controlling the rough orchestration of the build. And we want to, as much as possible, continue to push the pieces down into the tools that ship with Visual Studio and just automate those on the build server, right? So the idea is, in this case, MS Build, via the web publishing targets, has a whole bunch of really good automation. It knows how to create web deploy packages and to do config transforms and all that. And it's got this mechanism to control that called publishing profiles. And so we wanted to make use of that when we do this particular deployment, so we don't have to, try to do it a different way and have it kind of work in Visual Studio and kind of work in Team Build. And let's see if this works. So looks like that ran. Let's create another one. Call 12. It's fine. Blue. Create that. Awesome. So there we go. It worked. So very simple website, but pretty common. Forms over data kind of thing, using SQL on the back end, deploying and updating consistently every time you add a new column or new something, right? The migrations will take care of moving that information. Okie dokie. So that's ASP.NET. Any questions? OK. So moving on. See, what did I say I was going to do next? I think I said Node.js. How many people here are familiar with Node.js? How many people have used the Node.js tools for Visual Studio? OK. So they're definitely in alpha, but they're coming along, and they're actually really, really interesting. And the nice thing is they've done a lot of work to make this next process much easier than it used to be. So I'm going to create another new project, and I want JavaScript this time. And I want to do a blank Windows Azure Express app. And I've got a Git repository all set, ready to go. Just call this a task app. Yep. Now, I've had some issues with this working here lately, so hopefully it will work. Where the NPM that it tries to run doesn't show up for some reason. So I have to go and look and see if it's been created or not. All right. Well, it looks like it's there. So I got to file a bug on these guys. Just started happening to me today. So I'm going to go ahead and kill that one, see if that's the right one. Nope. Let's try the other one. It gets stuck for some reason. There it goes. All right. So we have a basic Express app. Hopefully it'll work. Nope. Oh. So I think there's another bug. For some reason, the default layout that that Express gives you, they're using doc type 5 instead of HTML, which apparently is no longer valid. So let's try this now. All right, so we have a basic working Express app. Now what I'm going to do with this guy is I'm going to turn it into a Windows Azure app. So I'm going to have a little task app here that is using the Azure storage SDK for JavaScript. So I need to install a few packages. All right, so is that one. I'm going to use something called nconf. Let's install that one. All right, close that. We're going to use one called node-uuid. Install that. And then one called async. All right. So I think that's everything. And now I've got all my modules. And to save a bunch of typing, I'm going to go and just pick up some code that I've written already and paste it in place. Just that, and then pick up one more thing, which we'll talk about in a second, which is a key piece to making this whole operation successful. Actually, let's put it here. Okay. So if we go in Visual Studio, we should see something, right? Nope. Did I put that in the wrong place? Node app, task app. I did paste that contents in there, didn't I? Do what? Did I put it in the wrong place? You're right, I did. That wasn't very smart. Thank you. Let's try it, move it down one. Yeah, there we go. All right, so we'll reload that. And basically what I have here is a really, really basic Node app that that is a basic task tracker. And I did put my folder there. Yes, I did. Let's see if we can add existing item. Why is it not showing up? That's not where I want it. There we go. Include that in project. So I want that one. I want my task list JS. We'll include this guy and my config JSON. All right. So I think that's everything. Let's see if this runs. No? Azure Management Resource Module not found. Wonderful. Huh. Well, this might be a very short demo. Why would that not work? Darn it. No modules, everything there. Okay. Well, let's just go back into a plain old Express app then, and I can show you how that'll work. We'll just we'll skip the fancy Azure one. Sorry about that, guys. If you have any questions while I'm doing this, go ahead and ask them. Anybody? All right, let's try, see if it'll let me create a new project this time. No. Let's go through and get our packages. Jade. And then stylus. All right. Make sure this guy still works. No, it's not. It's going to crash. Hold on. Yep. All right. So, okay. Okay. All right. Well, we have a basic Express app, so let's just move on and get it checked in. So I have my changes. Let me add my, oops, stop. So that script I copied basically does one thing, and that's to make sure that we have all of our node modules. So it might be hard to see, but essentially what it does is it goes in and runs npm install before we actually try to package everything up. And you need to make sure that happens. Otherwise, when your app gets up to Azure, all the node modules won't be there and it won't run. Now, interestingly enough, you'll notice, I guess the point of this trip is you have to redirect standard error because for some reason, npm writes all of its status to standard error, which causes your build to fail. Because by default, when we run a command in build, if we get something on standard error, we assume there was actually an error. So you want to make sure you redirect standard error, and I've done that in this particular script. So I think I have all my changes. Make sure I'm not missing anything down here. Yeah, let's include that. Add. Okay, so we'll call this initial. Commit that. All right, sync this up to the server. I think I need another website. Let's do a new quick create here. Actually, let's do it this way. Node. No database this time. Okay. Give that a second to create. There it goes. All right. So now we have code, and we have to go set a few different properties on our build definition this time. So sort of same thing. We'll go back through. We can set the trigger how we want, pick our repository. I think this one is called node app. Pick the branch. Again, set up the basic defaults here. I'll use my controller. And then on the process side, instead of picking the solution this time, we want to pick actually the node project. And that's just the way these tools happen to work. But if I go through and I simply select the actual node project file, this NJS proj, and then all I need to do is tell MS-Build to run the package target, or /t:package. And so this is going to say, hey, when you run this, take all of that content that is our Express app, and then package it all up as a web deploy package. So in this case, it's the same kind of web deploy package that we're using for that ASP.NET was using. Did I not enable that? Oops. So it's nice, all the tools kind of work together. So we can queue this guy. Oh, crud. And you know what? I forgot to do the important part. I'm just going to stop that. The only other thing you have to do is, you'll notice in the build section here, we have these pre and post build script paths. Now these can be our good extensibility points for doing lots of different kinds of operations. The one That's really awesome. I put a square bracket there. So I'm going to have to fix this. What is that path? Task app. So like I said, this particular script file, what we're going to do is run it pre-build. And the nice thing here is you can actually run pretty much anything you want to in that pre-build section. So if, for example, you want to version your assemblies or run some sort of preprocessor, you can simply go into the create a script, check it in with your project, and set it in the pre or post build or pre or post test script area. And that gives you a relatively easy way to kind of customize your build process without actually having to go dig into the XAML. Over time, hopefully you will have to touch the XAML, maybe never is the goal. And so we're trying to add more and more kind of pluggable points there to make that a little bit less daunting. So if we run MS build for package, hopefully our script worked. Come on. All right, well, that seems successful. Let's see if we got an app that works. Nope. Ugh. All right, well, we're going to move on. Just quick here. Run optional script before MS build. Didn't look like it actually ran my script. No, there it goes. Oh, it's because I ran it after MS build instead of before. Oh, nobody caught that. So if I'd done, I'm not going to do the demo again, but if I'd done this properly, put this in the right place, in the pre-build instead of the post-build, the packages, the no modules would have been there that have been packaged up, and your app would have worked appropriately. So anyway, so that's how basically you deploy a Node app using VSO. And you can get as complicated as you want with the Node app, but it should be using the Visual Studio tools, it should be a relatively straightforward process to configure everything. You don't have to use them for editing, but they are nice to basically get the initial project file set up so you have all the right MS build targets. All right. Okie dokie. So let's see what's next on my list. So we did Node, Azure PowerShell. So how many of you guys watched the keynote this morning and saw all of the kind of interesting stuff you can do with PowerShell with Azure? Everybody said? Okay. So I actually think that's really powerful. And I really would like to, over time, again, sort of push more into enabling better scenarios for running PowerShell as part of your build. Again, to make that experience of how you would sort of manage and deploy and create stuff for Azure very similar. So I'm going to create a new website. And in this case, we're going to use the feature that lets it create remote resources for us. We'll go ahead and add some unit tests. Let's just have no authentication on this particular site and create it. So it's going to ask us again to sort of walk through creating another website. And in just a second, it's going to insert, hopefully, there it goes. It's going to insert a bunch of PowerShell into our project. Now these are PowerShell scripts that are sort of pre-configured to publish this particular web application to Azure. Now they're designed to work with, if you've used the PowerShell, you know that you kind of register a subscription with your computer, and the PowerShell modules just kind of pick that up and use that as the certificate. So what we need to do in order to make this work with VSO is we need to make sure we have that same environment, because that's how the PowerShell modules are designed to work. So what I've done is written a script that will do all of that setup for you. So if I go here, I've got this deploy P shell web script. And if I take a look at it, there's a bunch of sort of .NET code and calling the TFS object model. But in the end, what it mostly does is it sets up your Azure subscription using that certificate that I talked about before. So remember at the beginning I said when you set up the connection between Azure and VSO, it gives us a management cert. Well, that management cert is stored on your account, encrypted, and this script basically downloads it and gets it set up on the build machine so you can use PowerShell. And then from then on, you can just write whatever PowerShell you would normally write to automate Azure and do that as part of your build. So if I go ahead and add this to my project, we'll go ahead and put this in our published scripts folder and then add it to our project here. This one, okay. Let's see. Oops, that's the one I want. You can see it's all nicely, PowerShell's actually colorized in Visual Studio now. So, all right. So once I've done that, I need to just go ahead and check in my changes. So we'll make sure packages aren't, let's exclude our packages. Everything else is there. Okay. And we'll push everything up. All right, now in this case, we're not actually going to use one of the sort of configured deployment definitions because we decided that with PowerShell, we want to do the deployment ourselves, right? We don't want it to happen automatically and sort of opaquely. So what I want to do is I'm just going to create a new kind of plain definition. We'll make it manual is fine. In this case, it's in our P shell web repository. We'll use that one. And then in the process, we'll make one minor change. So we want to use this template. Just for, right, so there's two, it's a little trick here because sometimes this causes problems. There's actually two Git templates listed here. One of them is designed to work with Visual Studio 2012, right, which is Visual Studio 11. And then the one that's .12 is designed to work with Visual Studio 2013, which is 12.0. Generally speaking, what you'll see is you'll see a template with a .Visual Studio version. And the idea is that's running the same tool set that ships with that version of Visual Studio. So in the case of the .12 template, it's running MS Build 12. It's running the 12.0 version of the test runner. And that's important as you use different solutions from different versions of Visual Studio. Sometimes you want to make sure that you're using the version of MS Build that you expect. So I'm going to switch that to .12. And then in this case, we're going to go in and add a few arguments into our thing. So I'm actually going to go down. So you notice we have the pre and post script test. So in the post test script path, I'm going to go ahead and set up sorry, wrong one. Let's go to the publish scripts. We'll just deploy P shell web, PowerShell. All right. And then there's a few other properties that we need to go through. So what I want to do is set some MS Build command line properties that tell MS Build to create a package for me. Now, one of the things you'll notice here is there's this TFS build binaries directory macro that's listed here. And that's simply just, there's a number of macros, and they're documented on MSDN, but it's a way that when you write your scripts, you can sort of find your location, right? The build machine puts your binaries, puts your sources, and your test results in a sort of a specific directory hierarchy on the machine. And if you want to write scripts, it's nice to be able to know where those things are. So you can use these macros either like this in inputs, or they're set as environment variables for when the script runs as well. All right. So we'll set the MS build command line arguments. And then we want to set a few arguments here on the deployment script. Post-step script arguments, okay. So now this, see if that saved that. All right, so if all goes well, we should be able to now deploy using PowerShell. So what's going to happen is one of the arguments that I gave to the script is what we call a deployment environment. Deployment environment is simply a named reference to that certificate I was mentioning. It's got a few settings on it, but one of the most important ones is the cert. So the PowerShell will go in, it will download the cert, it will install it into the local cert store on the build machine automatically, and then set everything up to work from there. And if I didn't have any typos or anything else this time, we will hopefully see this work. So we're going to run the Visual Studio Test Runner, which we'll get to in a second. And run our deployment script. And then hopefully we will have a deployment here in a second. All right, oh, no errors. So let's go to our site. There we go. All right, so it's a simple ASP.NET site, but you can easily see how, again, using all of the nice features that are in the PowerShell commandlets, you could automate a lot more, right? You could have the build create, you could actually have the build create a website for you, right? Because you can do all of that. You could create virtual machines. You could set them up, deploy them, tear them down. So there's a whole bunch of interesting scenarios that are enabled by doing this. And I really think it feeds to the kind of power user. I get a lot of requests for, hey, how do I do multiple websites? I want to deploy 3 websites to 3 different places. Or I want to deploy a website and I want to deploy a VM and I want to set up a database. And trying to sort of pre-configure all that, based on all of the different needs becomes really not very useful, right? Because you'll always miss something. We always are going to miss some property that somebody wants. But having the ability to drop all the way down into script and use that script on your development box, right? This exact same deployment script would work just fine if you ran it on my dev box deploying to Azure, as long as I had the cert installed there, as it does on the build machine. So it really starts to get you much more into the, what the dev runs on their machine is what runs on the build machine mode. All right, so that's PowerShell. The last one, I guess, app is PHP. Anybody here do PHP development? Well, it's recorded, so hopefully, it's a question I get a lot. Actually, a lot of people ask me, so I have a PHP app, how do I deploy that? And it actually took me a while to figure out a good way to do it. And in the end, it sort of came down to that, hey, the PowerShell made it pretty easy. So I've got the ultimate PHP app here. So we'll just change this text. Build 2014. And I'm going to push to everything from the command line. Get add. All right, so that pushed. And in this case, I'll go back and we can take a quick look here. So I've got a very basic PHP app. Had to do a couple of things to make this work. First off, I've got that same PowerShell script that I had before with basically just a slight variation in the way I'm calling this publish Azure website commandlet that's provided. And I also have this null MS Build proj. One of the things that is necessary in the templates is you've got to have, that's not the one I want this one. You have to have something in the projects to build section for MS Build, and I'll see if I can loosen that over time. But it's just kind of the way the default templates are set up. But basically, I created a proj file that does nothing, right? It just satisfies the requirement that MS Build is there. And then, just like I did in the other example with deploying an ASP.NET app using PowerShell, in this case, I've used the same script and I'm deploying a PHP app. And if that, so I think that deployed, hopefully. And let's go and look. So if all went well there, I can go look at my, this one here. And we'll see that we're able to, oops, well, maybe not. Oh, it's because it's not a CI definition, darn it. Let's cue that. So that'll go through and deploy, and in a second we'll see the hello build. I guess it all boils down to trying to use similar techniques to deploy different stacks, right? So we've covered ASP.NET. Obviously, for now, with Team Build specifically, it's the most fully supported. It's the most deeply integrated. We are working hard to add better support for some of the other platforms that are definitely well supported by Azure, like Node, PHP, and Python, and even Java eventually. But with this, a couple of different sort of tips and techniques, you should be able to make it work. And all of the scripts that I've created, I've put up on CodePlex. And there's a link in the presentation, an AKAMS link in the presentation that points you at that CodePlex site. So you can go download them. And there's a few more that I've been working on that I'm going to add. So hopefully over time, I'll build up a little bit more of a reference for deploying different types of apps using VSO to Azure. OK, so last thing. Let's go look at my this PowerShell web thing. So you really can't have continuous integration without testing. And nice thing about Visual Studio 2012 and 2013 is we did a lot of work to make it possible to really use your own testing frameworks. So in this case, I actually have something set up with MS Test, but I should be able to go through and say, I'm going to remove this, that one, and I want to add a reference to XUnit. XUnit. So I'm going to install that, and we'll install the XUnit runners. Okay, and if I go here and say I'm going to be using XUnit, and get rid of test class here and change test method to fact, which is what XUnit calls their test attribute. Okay. And then we'll go ahead and update the cert dot, I think they call it not null maybe? Yeah, not null. Not null. And then I think they just call it equal. All right, that's built. So if I pull up the test window, I should, hopefully, come on. Man. Well, I should see the XUnit test show up there. I'm not sure why they're not working. But provided they were, you can also run those same tests using Team Build. So in the, you noticed in the template we ran the Visual Studio Test Runner. Well, the Visual Studio Test Runner works by having, by using these various different test adapters. And if I go look here, you can see what I've done is I've actually set this version control path to custom assemblies property on the controller. And you can actually set this property on the hosted build controller and on the and on your own controllers if you happen to have them set up. And what that contains, if I go look here, is the DLLs that are the runners, right? So in this case, there's actually one for Node. So if you use like Node Unit, you can run your Node unit test with Team Build. It's kind of cool. There's one for X unit, there's one for N unit. But if you simply check those adapters into a source control path, whether it's a Git repository or TFVC, and tell the controller where those are, when the build runs, it can use that same adapter to go through and do test discovery and everything. So that's that. I can check this in, and hopefully that build will work. Am I? I am. What is that? What is the attribute there? Is it trait? No. Do what? Trait? That's what I thought. Is that what I was missing? Nope. Nope. That's not right. No, you shouldn't need that. Do you need one? Do you have to have the fact on the class too? Can't remember. Who's next unit expert here? Nope, that's not right. Anyone? Am I missing something? Is it scenario? No. I think that's in unit. Anyway. We'll have to go out and figure out what I messed up this time. Well, it's not going to, Anyway, well, I'll figure that out and hopefully can post something as to why that is not working. Okay, so I think that's everything. PowerShell, testing frameworks, unit tests, resources. Okay. All right, so it's kind of a whirlwind tour through a bunch of different stuff. My general goal was just to try to get as much information about how to do different things with Build and VSO out. The AKAMS link there for the sample code, that's a repository, like I said, it's a repository I put on CodePlex, and I'm going to continue to add other both instructions on how to do different things as well as sample code and scripts there. So it should turn into a pretty decent resource for managing, deploying different types of apps with Team Build and with VSO. So, questions? Yes?
Can you talk a little bit about the deployment model you have to use if you're not using an Azure website, you're actually using a cloud service?
Mm-hmm. So that works as well. So basically the same steps that you go through for setting up the deployment, the templates know how to work with cloud services just like they work with, just like they know how to work with websites, right? So the model from the user's perspective, we try to make that as straightforward and just work basically the same. I haven't made a cloud service work with the PowerShell stuff yet, but it's kind of next on my list because I think with cloud services specifically, that becomes a lot more interesting just because there tend to be more moving pieces as it relates to those. But from a model perspective, if you have a cloud service project in Visual Studio and you use the sort of built-in deployment templates, it will deploy a cloud service as well.
And that works with Visual Studio Online? I'm trying to
yes,
can't get my head around where the actual CS package artifacts records are not in Visual Studio Online, so you have to use a build controller locally or what?
No. The build servers in VS Online will generate your CS pack, right? So your source code's in VS Online, MS Build runs and generates the CS pack file, and then that gets deployed to Azure. Okay? There's a couple of things, actually, on that topic. Let me go through and show something really quick here. On the builds themselves, if I go look at, let's just look at this one real quick. Down here, there's this deployment section. And that's actually got a bunch of different sort of settings you can change. So for example, do not delete. If you are You don't want to delete the target website, right? If you're deploying, that needs to be set. It defaults to true. But also in this Windows Azure deployment environment, if I click on that, it'll bring up a little dialog that actually lets me set some other things. So you can notice in this actually shows which subscription you're using in this case, and you can actually have more than one here. Just a name. And then for website, it's just the name of the website and the web space. But for a cloud service, these are sort of some of the other properties you can set when you deploy a cloud service, like which storage account you want to use. If there's a specific storage account that you want to use, or a deployment label, if you want to go to staging or production, right? And then whether or not you want to do an upgrade or a complete, wipe and replace. Other questions? Yes.
Hello. Do you plan to have Coded UI build support on Azure?
At some point, we'd like to. The issue we run into is Coded UI requires a desktop session right now, and the build machines are, they're just VMs that we run as a service, and so having an unlocked desktop is a little bit of a security problem, sort of riding out there in the cloud. We have some ideas that we're working through, and we have a prototype that sort of works, so at some point, we definitely will. It's just a few challenges as far as kind of technically how to make that happen.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. Aside from this, I'm actually going downstairs right after this to the experts one-on-one thing, so I'll be there from 3:30 to 5:30. So, if you have other questions or you want to talk about something else unrelated to this topic altogether, related to ALM, just come find me. All right, thank you.